Hello, welcome back. Hope I am not scaring you with all these low-level debugger, etc. That is not at all the intention. We just wanted to understand what happens under the hood. How does VS Code actually makes use of this debugger under the hood? Okay. So, in the previous session, we actually explored quite a bit of commands that we can use with the LLDB and perform the debugging. The same debugging that we used to do in VS Code, the same thing can be done here as well, is what we understood. But of course, this was not that comfortable. I wouldn't recommend this to you at this point of time. Of course, it's quite powerful, right? There are use cases where you may have to fall back into the low-level debugger, but it is outside of the scope of our discussion at this point of time. All great. So we could debug out of the box. Was it so? Actually not. We used to generate the a.out. We already know the command to do that, right? cc star.c we used to say, and we used to generate a.out, right? So far. And we were supplying, we were creating that executable and we were debugging that executable. Only generating the executable, does that suffice? Let's explore that. I think to do that, let me delete the executable file altogether, a.out. I deleted that, and there is an esoteric folder with an extension .dsim, right? I don't know what is this, but looks like debugger is making use of this, I suspect. So I delete that as well, because we never created it manually. So I am going to delete that as well. Let's not worry about this .vs code. It also contains 2 files in it. There are some configurations which we need to do to tell VS Code how to debug, okay? But they have nothing to do with the low-level debugger, okay? So I'm still keeping them around. Okay, for the sake of completion, let's go to a clean slate. I am going to delete that as well. All happy? Clean slate. Cool. Now we should be able to invoke, we should be able to see what happens with the low-level debugger. For that, let me open another session altogether. Let me say LLDB, back into the debug session. As usual, we need to say this is our executable. The moment I say, it says, I don't know what is this, right? It doesn't exist, isn't it? So we should create that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say cc star.c. We all know this, right? So this is going to create that a.out. Thanks, right? So it creates that thanks to the compiler. Let's try now whether it identifies a.out. I hope it does, because it is ready now. Yep, it could figure that out, right? So a.out is ready. Now let us try to set the breakpoint. How do you do that? Breakpoint, breakpoint set, file, prime dot test.c. Auto completion is not working. I'm sad. Anyway, let's try to set this point. Line number 10 in this file. It complains what this breakpoint I can't set, right? It's pending, unable to resolve your breakpoint, right? So we are actually instructing, hey, can you set up this breakpoint in this particular file? So under the hood, debugger is supposed to map that into the exact line in its machine code, isn't it? Or the instruction in the machine code, that is the executable code, so that it can stop at that exact instruction when it is running, isn't it? So now debugger is struggling. I can't map the instructions that you are giving in the high-level language to the low-level language. Right? It is complaining that. At the same time, let us also try this process launch, what it does, let's say, and let's say stop at entry. Okay, let it, because we are not able to set the breakpoint, at least we can instruct it. Can you stop at the entry? Okay, let's try this. Okay, because executable is there. Let's see what it does. Boom, it brings up, and thanks to the machine code, see the machine code here, move and move, all those things are low-level machine code. We can't make anything out of this, right? So this is very hard for humans. This is of little use actually. I can do a step in thread. I think it is possible. Let's say step over, for example. it might take me to the next line, I think 3, 4. Yeah, it is doing all those things religiously, but this debugging is happening at the machine code level, right? This is very hard. This is of little use to us. We would like to see the control flowing in the high level language, but the executable is running, of course, in the machine code. So this mapping, right, from high level to low level and low level to high level, machine to high level language to machine code. This mapping, if it exists, debugger can do a better job, right? So how do we generate that? It is possible. Okay, so that is known as debug symbols. In some other languages, it might be called as source maps also. But in our C and C++ world, it is known as debug symbols. So we can actually generate, and who is the best person to generate that? The compiler itself, okay? So instead of simply compiling that, we can also instruct the compiler, please generate that mapping. Otherwise, our debugger will only take us through that machine code. We can't understand anything in it, right? So we don't want that. The poor human beings, we can only understand the high level language, right? So please set up that mapping file so that the debugger can actually do that thing, right? From the low level language to the high level language mapping it can do, okay? And also help us to set up those breakpoints. Without breakpoints at all, it is all meaningless for us, right? Cool. Now it is going to generate not only the a.out, but also that esoteric folder debug symbols. Of course, discussing about its inner content is outside of our scope right now. You can actually figure that out, but I wouldn't recommend that at this point of time. If you are a beginner, might get lost very quickly with that, because that format is very complicated, I think, right? Even I do not know. I haven't digged into it that much, right? Okay, anyway, you don't need to know about it. All that you need to know is you need to generate the debug symbols, which will help the debugger to set up the breakpoints and take us through the high level language when the executable runs, okay? So now to experiment this, what I can do is I can come out of this so that I start a new session so that it loads the debug symbols as well. So let me do that quite quickly, right? So I'm in the debug session. Now I can say, hey, please a.out, right? Now I can also breakpoints as well. I can set that breakpoint set, isn't it? Set. I think we have already typed in, so let me try to bring that. Yeah. Okay, so now it is able to set the breakpoint. Look at that. Successfully it is able to set, no issues. I can now say process launch, right? It can launch and stop at the breakpoint which we are asking it to stop, right? Instead of taking us through some machine code and all that. Now you can continue. So the message is very clear. For the debugging to work correctly, we should have the debug symbols also along with that, not only the executable. And it is also known as source maps in some other language context, such as JavaScript, for example. So without that, you will not be able to perform proper debugging. The experience will be very bad, right? You will not be able to set the breakpoints in a high level language, or you might not be able to see program execution reflected back in high level language, okay? So this is the prerequisite. You should have a.out, you should have debug symbols. A.out is your executable, and also debug symbols should be present so that you can perform the debugging. Okay, all great, but we might not be willing to use this low level debugger. If you want to become a geek, or you want to show that you are a geek, you might be preferring it. Okay, just kidding. But Visual Studio Code is better at this point as a beginner. Of course, the experience is much better. Now, since that VS Code folder we talked about is also removed, so no options are shown here at all. So to get those options, we should go with some actions here. So one button, run and debug, is shown here. Along with that, create a launch.json file is also shown. So these things we will explore in our next session. Stay tuned. Thank you.